The Galactic Empire did not fear many things. Stars collapsing? They had seen it. Civilizations rising and falling? Routine. Entire sectors burning in war? History. But what they did fear was unpredictability. And humanity was the most unpredictable species they had ever encountered. For 3 centuries, Earth had been labeled a low-priority developing world. A small blue planet on the edge of Imperial territory. Harmless. Ignored. Occasionally monitored. That was the official classification. Until the day everything changed. In the Imperial War Chamber, High Admiral Kor Vex stood before a massive holographic map of human space. His eyes narrowed as data streams flowed endlessly across the display. Humans are expanding again. One officer reported nervously. Kor Vex didn't look impressed. Expansion is irrelevant. Another officer hesitated. Sir, they're building something in the Orion Belt. Massive energy signatures. The room fell silent. A new projection appeared. A structure the size of a small moon. But it was not a moon. It was a ship. A carrier. No, something far larger. Something the Empire's scanners struggled to classify. Kor Vex stepped closer. What is that? No one answered immediately, because the truth was uncomfortable. We don't know, sir. For the first time in years, silence in the chamber felt heavy. Light years away, in the dark orbit of a hidden human shipyard, Admiral Elias Carter watched the final assembly phase begin. The Supercarrier Abyss Titan slowly rotated inside a massive construction halo. It was not elegant. It was not beautiful. It was a fortress built into a moving continent of steel. A young engineer beside him whispered, Sir, if the Empire discovers this, they'll declare full extermination. Carter didn't even turn his head. They already planned that. The engineer froze. What? Carter finally looked at him. They voted on it 3 weeks ago. A long silence followed. Then Carter said something even colder. We just decided not to wait for the execution. Back in the Empire, High Admiral Kor Vex received classified intelligence. Humanity had detected the extermination vote, and instead of panicking, they went silent. Too silent. No diplomatic messages. No threats. No surrender requests. Only construction. Something was coming, and no one in the Empire knew what it was yet. But for the first time in Imperial history, the Empire felt like it had already made a mistake. A very large mistake. And somewhere in the dark, the Abyss Titan's core began to wake. Part 2. The Empire had always believed that silence meant fear. It was one of their oldest doctrines, an equation written into every military academy across their domain. No response equals no resistance. No resistance equals victory assured. But humanity was rewriting that equation in real time, and the Empire was too arrogant to notice. In the depths of the Orion shipyards, the Supercarrier Abyss Titan completed its final systems calibration. Entire docking rings the size of cities rotated around it like mechanical halos. Thousands of drones moved in synchronized patterns, sealing armored layers that no conventional weapon in the galaxy could easily breach. Inside the command core, Admiral Elias Carter stood with his arms folded behind his back. A tactical officer approached him. Sir, final readiness check is complete. The Abyss Titan is operational. Carter nodded once. And the rest of the fleet? The officer hesitated before answering. 70% of all hidden carrier groups are now online. A pause. Remaining 30% are still syncing AI coordination layers. Carter's expression didn't change. Good. We are ahead of schedule. The officer blinked. Sir, ahead of schedule for what exactly? Carter finally turned toward him. For survival. That single word ended the conversation. Far across Imperial space, High Admiral Kor Vex studied new sensor reports. More anomalies. More human activity. But still no aggression. That was what unsettled him most. A junior officer spoke carefully. Sir, we are still within optimal strike window. Should we proceed with preemptive elimination of Earth? Kor Vex paused. Normally, he would have answered instantly, but something about the reports felt wrong. Human shipyards were not behaving like civilian infrastructure anymore. They were behaving like something else, like they were waiting. He finally responded, "Delay the strike." The room went silent. The officer looked confused. "Sir," Korvek's eyes narrowed. "I said delay it." For the first time in years, the Empire hesitated. On Earth, deep underground beneath the Pacific Ocean, Admiral Carter entered a classified chamber known only as the Black Command Vault. Rows of inactive fleet holograms floated in the darkness. Each one represented a hidden strike group, each one older than most Imperial intelligence databases. A young strategist spoke quietly. "Admiral, the Empire will detect us soon. We can't keep the Abyss Titan hidden much longer." Carter walked slowly between holograms. "They don't need to detect it." The strategist frowned. "Sir," Carter stopped. "They need to see it once." A pause, and then understand nothing they know about war applies anymore. At that moment, the Abyss Titan activated its secondary core. A low gravitational pulse rippled through space. It was not an attack. It was a signal, and it traveled far enough to be detected by Imperial deep space sensors. Within seconds, alarms erupted across the Empire. High Admiral Korvex received the report personally. Unknown megastructure fully activated in Orion sector. Mass exceeds all known carrier classifications. Energy signature unstable but controlled. Korvex stood still as the projection updated. The object was now visible, not as a ship, but as a moving fortress of impossible scale. A supercarrier. No, something beyond that. A floating war continent. And then came the second report. "Sir, it is broadcasting." Korvex narrowed his eyes. "Audio." The officer shook his head. "No, sir." A pause. "It's broadcasting positioning data." That meant only one thing. The ship wasn't declaring war. It was announcing arrival. On the Abyss Titan, Admiral Carter finally gave his first real command since activation. "Bring the fleet online." One by one, hidden human strike groups emerged from stealth corridors across the galaxy. Not one, not 10, hundreds. The Imperial intelligence network collapsed under the sudden realization. Humanity had not been building a fleet. They had been building an answer. And now, they were ready to speak it. Part 3. The Empire did not panic easily. It was built on centuries of expansion, suppression, and calculated dominance. Entire civilizations had broken themselves trying to resist Imperial fleets. But what was unfolding now in the Orion sector did not fit any familiar pattern. It was not rebellion. It was not resistance. It was coordination on a scale that should not have been possible. On the Imperial flagship, Dominion ascended. High Admiral Korvex stood before the central tactical sphere. The display had expanded beyond its limits. Human fleet markers were appearing faster than the system could label them. One officer spoke with rising alarm. "Sir, we are detecting simultaneous fleet activations across 17 star systems." Another interrupted immediately. "Now 23 systems." Then another voice, sharper. 31 systems. The room erupted into controlled chaos. Korvex did not move. He simply watched, because for the first time in his career, numbers no longer gave him comfort. They gave him doubt. "Identify command structure," Kor ordered. A tactical analyst responded quickly. "There is no single command signal, sir." Kor's eyes narrowed. "No central authority?" The analyst hesitated. "Not in the traditional sense." A pause. "Each fleet is operating independently, but they're synchronized as if sharing a unified intent." That sentence caused silence across the bridge. Korvex slowly turned. "That is impossible," the analyst replied quietly. "Then humanity is performing the impossible." Light years away, aboard the Abyss Titan, Admiral Elias Carter stood inside the central command spine. The supercarrier was no longer just a vessel. It was a living network. Walls pulsed with data. Entire decks functioned as distributed computing nodes. Thousands of tactical AIs processed battlefield probabilities in real time. A junior officer approached. "Admiral, Imperial fleets are mobilizing. They've entered defensive posture." Carter nodded. "Good." The officer frowned. "Good." Carter's gaze remained fixed on the star map. "Yes." A pause. "It means they finally understand we are not hiding anymore." The Abyss Titan's primary systems expanded its influence across linked human fleets. A signal spread silently, not a broadcast, a unification protocol. Every hidden human shipyard, carrier group, and defense swarm synchronized into one operational lattice. For the first time in known history, humanity's military structure stopped being fragmented and became something else entirely, a distributed organism of war. In the Empire, Core Vex received a classified update. Human ships were not just appearing. They were organizing space itself. Entire sectors were being mapped into layered defense grids. Hyperlane access points were being controlled before Imperial fleets even arrived. It was as if humanity had already fought this war many times before. Core Vex finally spoke. "Tell me what they are planning." No one answered immediately. Then a subordinate whispered, "Sir, it looks like they are preparing to contain us." Core Vex turned sharply. "Contain an empire?" A pause. "That is not strategy." His voice lowered. "That is insanity." But even as he said it, the Empire's forward fleets began to lose contact with scouting units. One by one, not destroyed, not engaged, just cut off, like the battlefield itself was closing around them. Inside the Abyss Titan, Admiral Carter activated the final phase authorization. A deep mechanical tone echoed through the carrier. All lights shifted from blue to deep crimson. A junior strategist spoke carefully. "Admiral, final doctrine confirmation required." Carter didn't hesitate. He spoke one sentence. "Begin Supercarrier directive." Every human fleet received the same order simultaneously. And across the galaxy, Imperial commanders finally understood what they were facing. The Abyss Titan was not the flagship of humanity. It was the trigger, and it had just been pulled. Part 4. The moment Supercarrier Directive activated, the entire battlefield changed structure. It was no longer a confrontation between fleets. It became a controlled collapse of Imperial mobility. On the Dominion ascended, High Admiral Core Vex watched in disbelief as his fleet projections began to fracture. "Report," he barked. A tactical officer shouted back. "Sir, hyperlane locks are failing across the forward sector." Another voice followed immediately. "Rear fleet formations are being isolated." Core Vex slammed his fist against the console. "By what mechanism?" Silence. Then the answer came, quiet, uncertain, almost unwilling to be spoken. "Human coordination grids, sir." Core Vex turned slowly. "That is not a mechanism." The officer swallowed. "It is now." Across Imperial space, fleets attempting to advance toward the Orion sector found themselves unable to maintain formation integrity. Navigation routes that should have been stable were subtly rerouted. Not jammed, not destroyed, rewritten. Human systems were not blocking the Empire with force. They were shaping the battlefield like a living algorithm. Every Imperial advance created 3 unintended weaknesses. Every retreat created 2 new traps. It was war, but it felt like the battlefield itself had chosen a side. Inside the Abyss Titan, Admiral Elias Carter stood in the command spine, surrounded by cascading tactical projections. A junior officer spoke urgently. "Admiral, Imperial forces are requesting engagement authorization protocols." Carter nodded slightly. "Let them request." The officer blinked. "Sir," Carter turned toward the vast star map. "They're still thinking this is a war we are participating in." A pause. "It isn't." The Abyss Titan's core expanded, its processing envelope across human fleets again. A new directive spread silently. Phase 2. Structural control. Human carriers stopped reacting individually. Instead, they began acting like a single distributed intelligence, with each ship serving as a node in a galaxy-wide tactical brain. Imperial observers struggled to describe it. One analyst finally summarized it in a terrified report. "Sir, it is as if every human ship knows what every other ship will do before it happens." Core Vex stared at that line for several seconds. Then he whispered, "That is impossible," but the battlefield was proving otherwise. The first true engagement occurred at the edge of the Orion corridor. An Imperial strike group attempted a rapid breakthrough using high-yield plasma lances designed to rupture carrier formations. They expected resistance. They expected casualties. They did not expect silence. Human ships did not scatter. They did not retreat. They simply adjusted their positions by fractions of distance that seemed meaningless, until the entire Imperial volley passed through empty space. Not intercepted, not deflected, simply rendered irrelevant. Corvex watched the footage replay 3 times. Then he spoke slowly. They are not reacting to us. A pause. They are correcting us. On the Abyss Titan, Admiral Carter received confirmation. First Imperial strike group neutralized without vessel loss. A young strategist frowned. Neutralized without destruction? Carter nodded. Yes. The strategist hesitated. Then what did we do? Carter's eyes remained fixed on the shifting star map. We proved a point, a pause, that they cannot win by force alone. The Empire finally began to understand the nature of the Abyss Titan. It was not a weapon that destroyed fleets. It was a system that made entire fleets logically incapable of winning engagements. Every Imperial movement was accounted for before it was executed. Every tactical option had already been mapped and countered. And worse, there was no central weak point to strike, because the Abyss Titan was not just in one place anymore. It was distributed across every human fleet. Corvex stood in silence as his command bridge fell into uneasy stillness. For the first time in his life, he felt something unfamiliar rising inside him. Not anger, not fear, something deeper, understanding. He finally spoke, almost himself. This is not an empire fighting humanity. A pause. This is an empire fighting a mind that spans a galaxy. And for the first time, he was no longer certain the Empire was the stronger intelligence in the war. Part 5, Final. The Imperial War Council did not sleep that cycle. No one could. Across every command channel, every fleet report, and every tactical relay, the same conclusion repeated itself in different forms. Humanity could not be contained using conventional Imperial doctrine. And worse, humanity had stopped behaving like a civilization. It was behaving like a system. On the Dominion Ascendant, High Admiral Corvex stood alone in the tactical chamber. The star map in front of him had become almost unrecognizable. Entire sectors were marked as non-interactable. That term did not exist in Imperial warfare vocabulary until today. A subordinate officer approached carefully. "Sir, we've lost contact with 12 expedition fleets." Corvex didn't respond immediately. After a long silence, he asked, "Lost or redirected?" The officer hesitated. "No confirmed destruction signatures." Corvex closed his eyes briefly. "Then they're still alive." A pause, but no longer ours. Light years away, aboard the Abyss Titan, Admiral Elias Carter observed the final stabilization phase of the battlefield. The Imperial advance had slowed to near stillness. Not because they lacked strength, but because every possible direction forward now resulted in failure states. A junior strategist spoke quietly. "Admiral, Imperial Command is requesting negotiation channels." Carter didn't look away from the star map. "Open them." The strategist blinked. "Sir?" After everything they did, Carter finally turned. "Yes." A pause. Because war ends when communication begins. The communication link activated. Corvex appeared on the main holo channel. For the first time, he did not with a tone of certainty that defined Imperial leadership. His voice carried something unfamiliar. Constraint. "You have us contained," he said. Carter nodded once. "Yes." Corvex studied him. "And yet you did not destroy us." Carter replied calmly. "That was never the objective." A silence followed. Then Corvex asked the question that had been forming since the battle began. "What are you?" Carter looked at him for a long moment, then answered simply, "We are what you create when you leave us no alternative." Across the battlefield, Imperial fleets remained intact, but immobilized. Every ship capable of firing still functioned. Every crew still alive. But every movement forward collapsed into failure before execution. The Abyss Titan's distributed command network had effectively rewritten the rules of engagement, not by destroying the Empire, but by making aggression mathematically unsustainable. Core Vex finally lowered his head. "We came to erase you," he admitted. Carter did not interrupt, and instead, Core continued, voice quieter now, "We proved we do not understand what we are dealing with." A pause. "What is your demand?" Carter answered without hesitation. "Stand down." Another pause. "Withdraw your fleets." A final, quieter addition. "And never mistake silence for weakness again." The Imperial Council voted within hours. Not for victory, not for escalation, but for withdrawal. Because for the first time in Imperial history, the cost of continued engagement was no longer measured in ships or resources, but in inevitability. As Imperial fleets slowly disengaged and retreated from the Orion Corridor, Core Vex sent one final message to Admiral Carter. "This war did not end the way we expected." Carter replied, "Wars har elido." Core Vex hesitated. "And the Supercarrier?" Carter glanced at the distant Abyss Titan, still looming across the sector like a silent guardian. "It was never meant to be seen as a weapon," he said. A pause. "It was meant to be a reminder." Core Vex frowned. "A reminder of what?" Carter's answer came softly. "That humanity does not disappear when threatened. It evolves." As the last Imperial fleet vanished in a hyperspace, the Abyss Titan powered down its directive state. Across human space, systems returned to standby. No celebration was broadcast, no victory declared, only silence. Because humanity did not measure success by destruction. It measured it by survival without compromise. And in the records of both civilizations, the event was later recorded under a single line. The day the Empire learned that a supercarrier is not a ship, but a warning. The end.